Okay, so I turned it on wrong. Sorry. Okay, a lot of you in here are probably thinking, am I on the wrong night? Is this the 39ers? No, but glad you're all here anyhow. You know, we're going to have a great time tonight studying God's Word. Fantastic subject of faith of the sick. I hope you get a lot out of it. I certainly did. Studying for this lesson tonight, it's a great study. I'm surprised I was given this opportunity, but I relish it. Thank you for letting me do this. So imagine a world where people are sick with diseases without a cure. We really don't have to imagine that world because we do live in a world with illnesses and diseases without a cure. And we know the toll those diseases take on people, on people's lives. During Jesus' ministry, there were many references concerning the faith of people sick with incurable diseases without any hope of cures. Each of these people came to Jesus because they had faith that he could heal them or their loved ones. A lot of these people came not for themselves, but for others. So why did these people have faith? These people heard Jesus teach with authority. That's the main thing tonight. Jesus taught with authority. If you look at Matthew 1:21 and 22, Mark 1:21 through 22, Matthew 7:28 through 29, and Luke 4:32, you'll see where all the times it's referenced that he taught with authority. They witnessed the miracles he performed. He didn't do this in a vacuum, guys. You know, he had people crowded around him. So he had many, many thousands of witnesses of the miracles that he performed. Or they marveled when people came and proclaimed the power of Jesus and the healing that he freely gave. In some of these stories tonight, he's going to tell these folks, go show yourself to the priest and don't tell anybody what's going on, you know, but you go show yourself to the priest. What did they do? They went out and proclaimed the power of Jesus and the healing that they got because they couldn't go anywhere else. They absolutely could not. In one of our stories tonight, we're going to see where one lady went to physicians for help, spent all of her money, and got worse. So we'll cover that tonight. They believed, these people believed in the power of Jesus. They had faith that Jesus could heal them. Their faith created action on their part to come to Jesus and ask for healing. It's an amazing ride, guys. I hope you really enjoy this study. Tonight, we're going to be looking at the story of the leper, the Canaanite woman's faith, Jairus' daughter, and the unclean woman. Each of these are found in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and there's the passages there. But as we go through, we'll show you the passages each and every time. The leper, found in Matthew 8, Mark 1, and Luke 5. What was so critical about the leper? He had leprosy. What was leprosy? In biblical times, it was any skin condition, a rash, that was termed to be chronic, incurable, associated with death, or a living death. Just think, people with leprosy were ostracized, they were social outcasts, they were considered unclean. We'll get to that in a few moments, what that meant. They existed mostly as beggars on the side of a road. They were ostracized out to leper colonies. It was considered anything they were unclean, and anything they touched was unclean. So the early Israelites considered that as a punishment for sin and a divine curse. So in the Old Testament, what did unclean mean? Unclean in Leviticus 11 through 15, it describes what is unclean and how to deal with each event. Uncleanliness could apply to animals, to birds, to sea creatures, insects, and carcasses. It basically told them what type of animals, birds, sea creatures, and insects they could eat and which ones to avoid. Carcasses, of course, that was dead material, so they were told not to touch it or even try to eat it, you know. Childbirth, a woman was unclean after having a male child or a female child. If you had a skin disease, if you had a rash, if you had sunburns, sores, baldness, and sores came on your head, you had to go to the priest. If you had moles on your fabrics, the remedy usually was you go to the priest, let him examine you, and usually you were isolated for 7 days. You went back to the priest, let him look at you again, and he had the power to isolate you again for another period of time, depending on what the circumstance was, or determine if the person is cured. If he was cured, you could come back into the community. Usually after they were found cured, they had to wash their clothes, they had to offer sacrifices of some sort, different sacrifices for different things that were happening. Sometimes they had to shave their hair, the beard, the eyebrows, all that, and bathe. So there was a lot of cleansing rituals that they had to go through. Let's look at 5 things about the leper. First, the leper was judged unclean and was told to isolate. That meant he couldn't be around normal people. Everything he touched was unclean. Everything. So he was told to be away from everybody. And what did he do? He found out Jesus was coming, so he ran to Jesus, begging, fell down at Jesus' feet, showing reverence to Jesus, begging for help. He didn't stay away, but when he did come to Jesus, he was taking a huge risk. First, he didn't know what the people around him would do to him because he was supposed to be away from them. He didn't know what Jesus would do to him. Would he heal him? Would he rebuke him? What would he do? Remember, this is the Mosaic period of time, the Old Testament. They were living under the law of Moses. This was not the New Testament time that we are under now, or under the New Covenant. This is the Old Covenant. So they had to follow what the Mosaic law was all about. And the Mosaic law laid it out pretty firmly as to what they needed to do. Jesus touched a leper, an unclean person. That was shocking to the crowd surrounding Jesus. They didn't know, you just didn't do that. You didn't let a leper touch you. You didn't touch them. You stayed away from them because you didn't want that disease. Immediately, the leper was cleansed. He didn't have to go dip in the river. He didn't have to wait. He didn't have to do anything else. He was cleansed. Jesus told the leper to go to the priest and offer the gifts that Moses commanded, which were sacrifices of some sort. News of Jesus spread so that Jesus could not enter towns because of great crowds that were following him seeking healing. At one point, we'll see tonight, he couldn't even go into a town because people were crowded around him so densely. So he went out to the countryside, and guess what? They followed him. Can you imagine being out in the countryside all by yourself? And everywhere you look, in all directions, people are coming at you. Not just one or two people, but vast numbers of people. Or people carrying other people. Why? Because they needed healing. And they knew that Jesus could heal them. Because they had heard him talk. They had seen the miracles. They had heard the witnesses. They believed. They knew. They had faith. Jesus could heal them. Let's look at Matthew 8, 1 through 4. And if you look at different versions, it's basically the same story. I chose the NIV. I just like the way it reads easier, and I get tangled up in all those these and thous anyhow, so I use the NIV a lot. So NIV in verse 1 through 4 says, when Jesus came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. Whether he's coming out of a boat or he's coming off a mountain, he's out in the countryside, crowds are there following him, seeking healing. Verse 2, a man with leprosy came and knelt down before Jesus. That's showing reverence to Jesus. He knew that Jesus was mightier than just a person. He knew he was from God. God sent. Because he had power that nobody else had. He could do things that nobody else had. He could explain Scripture like the Pharisees couldn't do. He could. So he's bowing down to Jesus saying, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. Can you imagine people fainting over that? I mean, seriously, what are you doing? Stop, But Jesus reached out and touched the man. I am willing, he said. Be clean. And look at this again. It says immediately. He was cleansed of his leprosy immediately. Isn't that incredible? Incredible. Jesus was showing them things that they'd never seen before and never would after that. I am willing, he said. Be clean. Immediately he was cleansed. Then Jesus said to him, see that you don't tell anybody, but go to the priest and offer the gifts, as Moses commanded it as a testimony. Let's look at Mark 1, verses 40 through 45. Same story, just a little bit different context. Leper came, beseeching Jesus, begging Jesus, doing everything he can to talk Jesus into doing something for him. And look, and he's saying, if you will, Father, if you will, you can make me clean. Moved with pity. Now, Mark says moved with pity. Matthew just said he reached out and touched it. Moved with pity. Jesus empathized with these folks. He saw all kinds of diseases and conditions. Blind men, crippled people, you name it. He saw it. He healed it. Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand and touched him and said, I will. Be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him and made him clean. And then Mark says he sternly charged him. Matthew said he told him, go to the priest, show yourself to the priest, offer the sacrifices. But Mark says he sternly. So Jesus didn't want this revealed to anybody. But guess what? The more he told these people not to talk about it, In verse 45, look at this. But he went out, the leper went out, and began to freely talk about it, and news spread like wildfire. You know, what would you do if you had a condition that nobody could cure you? You were an outcast, and all of a sudden this person named Jesus healed you. You were white, your skin was white. It was clear. Wouldn't you go out and tell people? I would. This man did, and as we go through these stories, you're going to see these people could not contain themselves. They really couldn't. They went out and proclaimed the name of Jesus and the power he had and the healing that he gave, and he gave it freely. Gave it freely. And the scripture continues saying, the news about Jesus spread so much that Jesus could no longer openly enter a town, but was out in the country, and people came to him from every quarter. Amazing. Luke, chapter 5, verses 12 through 15. A little bit different take. And Jesus is going to one of the cities. Here comes the man with the leprosy, falling down at Jesus' feet, begging. This time begging, beseeching. Lord, if you will, make me clean. And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I will, be clean. And immediately the leprosy dropped off of him. Go to the priest to show yourself again. But look at verse 15. But now even more, the report about him went abroad, and great crowds gathered to hear and to be healed of their infirmities. It almost seems like to me that the more Jesus told these people not to talk about it, they went out and talked about it. They went out and told their friends, their neighbors, and everybody else. They proclaimed the word of God. They proclaimed the name of Jesus because he had power, he had authority. He wasn't just a Pharisee. Canaanite woman's faith in Matthew 15 and Mark 7. Okay. So here's the Canaanite woman. We're going to let's talk about her a little bit. She was a Gentile, first off, a non-Jewish person. That's what a Gentile is, non-Jewish. She's from the Phoenician area, which is now southern Lebanon. Probably lived in an area around Tyre and Sidon, because that's where Jesus was going to. Here in a little bit, we'll talk about that. Under Jewish law, the Gentiles were considered as not being part of God's promise, like the Jewish people were. Remember, the law of Moses was given to the Jewish people to be a separate and distinct people for God. Gentiles had no place in that. They were usually despised by the Jews. And until Jesus' death and the establishment of the new covenant, Gentiles were not even part of God's plan. Look at the response that Jesus had to her and her reply to him when we get down to Matthew 15, 27 through 28, and Mark 7, 27, 28. It's going to be astounding. What right did this Canaanite woman, who was a Gentile, who was not part of the covenant under the Mosaic law, what right did she have asking Jesus to heal her daughter? The only conclusion you come to, she had no right asking Jesus. She had no right asking Jesus to heal her daughter. Even though her daughter was in really bad shape, she had no right. Let's look at Matthew 15, 21 through 28. Now, Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And a Canaanite woman from that region came out and began to cry out. In my head, I'm imagining this lady is screaming, you know. May not be, but I'm imagining she's screaming. She knows Jesus is in the area. Apparently she knows a lot about Jesus, because she starts screaming out, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David." She knew a little bit about Jesus, didn't she? He was the Son of David. She knew it. She called him Lord. Son of David, my daughter is cruelly demon-possessed. But, look at this. He didn't answer her one word, didn't say anything to her. He ignored her. Can you imagine that? If you're in desperate shape, your child has got an issue, you know, a demon that's trying to kill herself sometimes, throwing herself, you'd do anything to save your child, wouldn't you? I would. I certainly would. So he ignored her. Even the disciples started telling him, "Send her away. She's screaming. She's yelling. Send her away." But he answered, "I was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." He's telling them fact. Under the Mosaic law, he's telling them fact. The lost sheep of Israel didn't include Gentiles, guys. Did not, no matter what the condition was. They could convert to Judaism, I'm assuming, but they weren't included. So he was right. He was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But she came and bowed down, showing reverence again to Jesus. And saying to him, "Lord, help me." And he answered and said, "It's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." Man, what a statement. It's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. That's literally, in my mind, calling her a dog. You know, you're not fit to even be here. You should be under the table with the dogs. But she answered, but she said, "Yes, Lord, you're correct. I have no right being here. I have no right. I have no right taking the bread from the children. You're right. But even the dogs feed on the crumbs which fall from the master's table." Amazing. She knew her place, didn't she? And look what Jesus says to her. "Oh, woman, your faith is great. It shall be done as you wish." And her daughter was healed at once. Amazing. Let's look at the Mark chapter 7. I'm including these additional references because it shows additional content, and all these stories are told differently by each of these writers to give us a little more insight as to what was really going on. That's why I included all these. And in verse 24, Jesus departed, went to the region of Tyre. He entered the house and did not want anybody to know it. He's trying to escape, get a little, time away from everybody, to not be noticed. He's trying to go in a house, but he could not escape notice. Instead, immediately after hearing about him, a woman with a little daughter who had an unclean spirit came and fell at his feet. And Mark says she was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth, up in that area, which is, again, southern Lebanon today. And she was asking him to cast out the demon from her daughter. Again, he said to her, let the children be fed first, because it's not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Wow. Pretty harsh rebuke, isn't it? Pretty harsh. But again, as the scripture says, she replied to him, Lord, even the dogs under the table, eat the children's crumbs. Then he told her, because of this reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter. When she went back home, guess what? Her daughter was sitting up in the bed, and she was cured. Amazing, just like Jesus said. Now we're going to look at Jairus' daughter. This is a little bit different type of story. Yes, the daughter is a child, and yes, she's ill. But she's ill to the point of death. So when Jairus comes to Jesus, she hasn't died just yet. But during all of this, we'll see what happens. Now, who is Jairus? He was a ruler, a synagogue leader, a ruler of the synagogue. He was a father with a 12-year-old daughter who was dying. Again, would you do whatever you could to save your children? I would. I absolutely would. Anything, almost anything, to save my daughter, to save my child. Jesus' journey to Jairus' house was delayed. You know, I never thought about that until I started studying for this. You know, Jairus comes and asks him to go, heals his daughter. Jesus gets up and goes. But I never thought about the other stories and the circumstances until now. But he was delayed. He was delayed by crowds pressing around him. Have you ever been into a crowded situation where there's just people everywhere? And I remember going to the Boston Red Sox game when the Astros were playing them for the World Series. We were at the Boston Stadium. And man, we couldn't even hardly move. Karen and I were side by side, but we couldn't hardly move. Just take a step here, step there. And people just pressing us from all sides. And that's what was going on with Jesus. People pressing him from all sides. And then on top of that, here comes this other lady named that we call the unclean woman, who also delays him by touching his garment. Well, that sets off a whole nother series of events. We'll get to that in a moment. But delays in receiving word of his daughter's death did not deter Jairus. He never lost his faith. He kept begging Jesus, let's keep going. Let's go. Let's go heal, you know. He never lost his faith. He never said, oh, well, you know, she's dead. You know, give it, forget it. Like he was prompted by other people that came from his house. They said, well, you know, we'll get to that in a minute. I'm giving away everything right now. Sorry. Okay. Matthew 9. Jairus' daughter. So, starting with verse 18 in chapter 9. So, while Jesus was saying this, a synagogue leader came and knelt before him and said, again, showing reverence, godly reverence toward Jesus. And he's a synagogue leader. You know, he's supposed to get the reverence because he's the leader of the synagogue. But no, he's here. You know, can you imagine what all these other people were thinking? You know, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, all these other people. Why are you going to show reverence to this guy? You know, he's a phony. We're going to get rid of him soon, anyhow. But he was showing reverence to Jesus and saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and put your hand on her, and she will live." Jesus got up and went with him, and so did the disciples. Now, at this point, verse 20, you see this other story about to develop. And it's called a sandwich story. You got one story inside another story, sandwiched in. That other story is the story of the unclean woman, and we'll get back to her in a little bit. She's an amazing story too. If you can, skip down to verse 23. So Jesus is headed toward Jairus' house. The girl is dying, or at the point of death. He's delayed by all these crowds, and then this other lady coming and touching his garments. And that just delayed. In verse 23, when Jesus entered the synagogue leaders, large crowds were there welcoming him into the city. They somehow or another, they knew he was coming, and they wanted to make sure that he knew they wanted him there. So they were welcoming him to come into the city. And Jairus came and started begging, falling at his feet, begging him to come. Jesus gets up to go, and guess what? Large crowds are crushing around Jesus. Not just circling Jesus, but rushing in on him. Tightly crushing in on him. It's going to be important when we get to the next story. Yeah, in verse 49, you'll skip down to that. While Jesus is still speaking, someone came from the house to Jairus and said, "Your daughter's dead. Why bother the teacher anymore? Give up. It's over. She's dead." He can't do anything to help her. But hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, "Do not be afraid. Just believe, and she will be healed." Believe. When Jesus arrived at the house, again, there was a funeral group wailing and crying, and he tells them she's asleep. They were laughing at him. He puts them outside, and her parents go up there, takes her by the hand, and says, "My child, get up." And you see the difference in each story, whether it's Matthew, Mark, or Luke, it's told a little bit differently. Here he's saying, "My child, get up." The other one was, "Little girl, get up." It's the same thing, really. Her spirit returns. She gets up immediately, and he tells the people to feed her. She's hungry. Now we come to the story of the unclean woman. And that's found in Matthew 9, Mark 5, and Luke 8. Why is she unclean? Because she has a blood issue, or hemorrhage, or discharge. It's been going on for 12 years. 12 years. She spent all the money she had on physicians trying to get well. Every dime. What happened? She got worse. She didn't get better. She got worse. She heard about Jesus and touched his garment. She'd been living with this for 12 years. She heard about Jesus. She knew he could help her. She touched his garment. You look at Matthew 9, start with verse 20. A little lead into it. Jairus is there, trying to get Jesus to go to his house. Jesus agrees. They all get up to go to Jairus' house. The crowd is pressing in from all sides again, just like all the other times. But now, in addition to the crowds, you have this woman with this blood issue. And starting in verse 20, just then, a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 up behind him and touched the edge of his garment. Just edge. She didn't grab him. She didn't take off his cloak. She just barely touched the edge of his garment. So she said to herself, if I can only touch the cloak, I will be healed. What incredible faith, guys. She didn't want to talk to Jesus. She didn't fall down in front of Jesus. She didn't worship. Only if I can touch the hem of his garment, I can be healed. So all bets were off, as far as she's concerned. She's going to do everything she could to make sure she touched that garment as he went by. But guess what? Jesus turned and saw her. Saw her. He looked at her and said, daughter, take heart. Your faith has healed you. Your faith has healed you. And the woman was healed at that moment. Incredible. Let's go to Mark 5, 25 through 34. Again, the story goes, Jesus was there in the area, Jairus comes. My daughter's dying. Jesus is ready to go. And the crowds are pressing in from all sides. It's hard for them to be going. And here in verse 25, this woman who had been subject to the bleeding for 12 years, and she had suffered a great deal at the hands of doctors, and spent all she had trying to get better, instead got worse. And in 27, when she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his clothes. Because she thought, if I can just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Look what happened in 29. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt that her body was freed from the suffering. If you were sick for 12 years, and all of a sudden you were well, don't you think you could feel in your body? Absolutely. All of us do. All of us do. And she felt it in her body that she was healed. So what else happened? At once, in verse 30, at once Jesus realized that power to heal had gone out of his body. He looked around the crowd and said, who touched my clothes? He already knew. He already knew what was going on and who touched him. But he wanted a witness. And the disciples said, you see people crowding around you from all sides against you. They're touching you. You can't hardly move. And you ask, who touched me? They were incredible. Incredulous, right? What are you talking about? One person touching you with all this crowd around? Everybody touched you. Jesus didn't mean just everybody, did he? So he kept looking around to see who had done it. And the woman, knowing that what had happened to her, and came and fell at his feet. Again, reverencing Jesus. Fell at his feet, and she was trembling with fear. Why was she trembling with fear? She had a disease for 12 years. She was healed. And the guy who healed her knew it was her and was looking right at her. She thought she was in trouble. She didn't know what was going to happen to her. What happened? What was the crowd going to do to her? What would Jesus do to her? She didn't know. So she came and fell down at his feet, trembling with fear, and told him the whole truth. What she did. Look at it, verse 34. He said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. Let's look at Luke 8:43. We're almost there, guys. Don't give up on me. I think you know the story by now. We're going to Jairus' house. Crowds are there. And in verse 43, a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her, she came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. Jesus says in verse 45, "Who touched me?" he asked. When they all denied it, good old Peter speaks up and says, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." Now, in Mark, he says the crowd, the disciples said this. In Luke, a little more specific, it was Peter that said this. Isn't that incredible? How Peter always seems to be a central guy, cutting off somebody's ear, saying, what are you talking about? People all around you. What are you talking about? Who touched you? But Jesus said, someone touched me. Incredible. In a crowd, he knew that one particular person who reached out for healing. They had the faith that the others didn't have, but she did. I know the power has gone out from me. He could feel the power going out to heal. He could feel it. He knew it. Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and told him everything, why she touched him. And then in verse 48, he says to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." Two more slides over there. Mutual connections of these people. How are we going to tie all this together? I bet you wondered that. But each of these people were desperate people. Every one of them. The daughter dying, leprosy, outcast. I mean, you name it. Every one of these stories, they were desperate. They had a problem that no one could solve, that there was no cure for. Physicians that had mistreated the unclean lady, taken all of her money. She got worse, not better. Delay meant hardship, other suffering, and even death in the case of Jairus' daughter. Faith in Jesus made them act in ways they may not have acted in normal circumstances. Each of these people were persistent. They didn't just ask once and go away, did they? No, they didn't. They kept on. Even acknowledging, I'm a dog. I'm no better than a dog. I'll eat the crumbs. But they were begging. Jairus continued begging, even though crowds were blocking their way. Even though the lady was tugging on Jesus or touching Jesus' cloak, delaying more. He never gave up. He never said, "Jesus, Lord, you might as well forget it." Jesus, he kept saying, "Let's go. Let's go." Even when the daughter died, he just kept begging Jesus to go. Their actions produced results needed in each of their circumstances. That's huge. Faith in action. We've heard that before, haven't we? Let's look at some takeaways and then the lesson's yours. Each person that Jesus healed and heard Jesus teach, heard eyewitnesses proclaim the power of Jesus and the healing that he freely gave, possibly have witnessed miracles performed by Jesus. Again, there were thousands of people crowding him constantly, following him everywhere, seeing these miracles. They were there because they had heard and witnessed. Each person seeking healing believed. They heard and believed and had faith. Faith of the person being healed, the leper. Faith of the person seeking help for another, Jairus. Faith of someone who had no right to expect healing from Jesus, the Canaanite woman. faith of someone who was clean, who was unclean, and everything they touched was unclean according to the law, the unclean woman. We'll look at number 3. Faith of each person led them to act. They sought out and approached Jesus, the leper, sought Jesus' help to save the daughter of Jairus, sought Jesus as a Gentile, someone not included in the plan, despised people, the Canaanite woman, sought Jesus when the law said they were unclean. They were supposed to be away from everybody else. You know, we're in a leper colony. Unclean woman. Because they acted, each person received the healing they desired. If these people had heard and believed and had faith, but did nothing further, the healing they desired would not have been possible. Hear it so. Hear, believe. Same thing today. We can believe all we want to, we can read the Bible all we want to, but unless we act, we're not going to get salvation. Just like these people. They did not act. They would not receive the healing they desired. Thanks everybody for being here. Hope you got something out of this lesson tonight.